Hey guys, I'm Dov, and today I'm back with more Total War Warhammer 2 online action. Today the High Elves are going to be taking on the Vampire Counts. This is actually a community cast submitted by Aristodemos, so let's go ahead and take a look here. He had talked about using infantry skirmishers to good effect against the Vampire Counts, and I challenged him to produce a replay, and here it is. So let's have a look. Teclis going to be leading the way for the High Elves. Got a pretty heavy front line with 3 Swordmasters of Hoeth, so definitely a lot of elite anti-infantry hitting power here. A couple of Spearmen to protect the flanks, 2 Lothern Sea Guard, and the Everqueen's Court Guards in the center. We've also got 2 units of Dragon Princes to help protect the flanks as well, and that's pretty much it for the High Elves. Moving on over to the Vampire Counts, you can see Red Duke up on his dragon here. No surprise in terms of his spell loadout. He's got Invocation, Raise Dead, and Wind of Death. Also got a Terrorgeist, a couple of Fell Bats here, some Graveguard and Sternsmen through the front line. Looks like some zombies to pad out numbers here. Plenty of skeleton warriors and spears scattered around as well, with a couple Graveguard with great weapons. So without further ado, let's get the battle rolling. You can see there's going to be quite the interesting positioning phase because Aristo kind of subverted this map. Usually most people just deploy right here in the center, but he deployed way out here with this kind of impassable terrain formation here on his left flank, and he's going to wheel around to kind of face this way towards the Vampire Counts. And yeah, it's an interesting play here. In terms of the Vampire Counts build, you know, Red Duke Terrorgeist is something that you'll see quite often. It's certainly a very common pick. I'm not the biggest fan of this, mostly because it's kind of goony, and I mean it works. Some factions I think it's maybe necessary against to go really monster hunting, really heavy monster hunting that is. But yeah, I'm just not the biggest fan. I think that against the High Elves in particular, bringing expensive air units is a huge risk, because if they happen to bring Tempest, you are SOL, my friend. Like, you are going to get just blasted by the Tempest. It'll do a ton of damage, and then you'll get shot to pieces in the meantime, most likely. So yeah, not a fan of bringing these expensive air units against the High Elves in particular. The Lizardmen, they can be pretty risky against as well, although Terrorgeists are really good against dinosaurs, so that's a little bit more of an even pick. But Alariel's not uncommon. She's got the Tempest. Teclis does not have Tempest, but he does have Nets of Ammontok, which is pretty nice. Looks like he's also carrying Flaming Sword of Ruin, Enfeebling Foe, and Regrowth. Interestingly, he does have Kindle Flame, which is a great pick against the vampires because they already have a lot of weakness to fire in general. And just, if you're using Everqueen's Court Guards or other units to do fire damage, like Star Dragons, the Fireborn, things like that, taking that Kindle Flame just gives you that extra 20%, what is it, 20-25% damage just across the board anytime you're using those flaming units. So it's useful in and of itself to have if you've got even just a handful, like these Everqueen's Court Guards, for example. A great pick to have the Kindle Flame with them. Even more so against the vampires. But yeah, you can see both forces just kind of positioning here. The vampires trying to take good advantage of their breaths before this engagement really gets underway here. But Aristo going to be pushing forward here, trying to force the vampires into an engagement. The one thing that this vampire build does lack entirely is Blood Knights. I am a huge fan of Blood Knights, and I think that they are an essential pick against the High Elves in particular, because they can challenge Dragon Princes really hard. They're great against the armored High Elf infantry. They can push through to your opponent's backline, but you can see Aristo going to be focus firing on the bats, which may seem a bit counterintuitive, but this is actually a really smart play here, because it's going to keep the bats from being able to tie down his units for too long. He's also got his Dragon Princes parked literally right on top of these Lothern Sea Guard, so the bats really can't push through and get to them very effectively. Granted, Lothern Sea Guard will be able to defend against bats pretty well, but right here the vampire player is making a pretty critical mistake. Can you spot it? Here it is. Right here. The Everqueen's Court Guards are online. This vampire player is trying very hard to shut down some Lothern Sea Guard, which is a good play, mind you. but these Everqueen's Court Guards are the biggest threat on the field by far. So everything needed to be committed to shutting them down specifically, I think. Like, that zombie summon should have been right on top of them, because right now this Terrorgeist is netted. It's probably already gone off, but the Kindle Flame was online with his base weakness to fire. All that combining means that those Everqueen's Court Guards are going to tear this Terrorgeist to shreds. He is done for. Already crumbling, lost, you know, 3/4 of his HP, and he's just done for. So he might be able to land and make a little bit of contact here with these Lothern Sea Guard, but of course they have spears. They should be able to defend off a Terrorgeist at such low HP. The Red Duke comes down, finally sensing the danger to shut down the Everqueen's Court Guards, but the Dragon Prince is right on station. Teclis himself also overcasting an enfeebling foe there, just to take down the Red Duke's stats, so he's going to pull back up into the air, and now the unsupported Vampire Count front line is just going to feed themselves to the Swordmasters of Hoeth. Yeah, even Graveguard with great weapons, unsupported, will just get cut to shreds by Swordmasters of Hoeth, because Swordmasters, especially with their martial prowess up, just have such good combat stats. 48 attack, 48 melee defense makes them one of the strongest great weapon infantry in the game, just in terms of their raw combat stats, especially for their cost. They're going to shred this vampire line without pretty much any issue. The Red Duke also getting netted and shot to pieces here, so yeah, fairly surgical takedown of the vampires here by Aristo. He's been doing a great job using these Dragon Princes to protect his archers. Anytime anything breaks through, you can see like these Skeleton Spearmen, for example, have broken through and trying to get into the back line here, but the Dragon Princes are charging around, you know, interrupting and doing a ton of shock damage in the meantime. And at this point, it's pretty much GG for the Vampires. I mean, they've lost the Terrorgeist. The Red Duke's taken a ton of damage. Looks like Enfeebling Foe going down on those Graveguard there just to help out the Swordmasters win. The Red Duke comes down to help support this front line a little bit, but probably needed to be doing this earlier on in the battle. But yeah, honestly, I think this Vampire build wasn't super well suited to take on the High Elves. I'll talk a little bit about what I think could be changed in the post-battle screen. You can see Teclis still secure here, and Dragon Prince is doing exactly what I said they were doing, which is charging around, trying to interrupt these skeletons. So you can see a few skeletons do make it to the Everqueen's Court Guards. Granted, I mean, they'll cut through skeletons, no problem with their good melee defense and everything, but still, to tie them down is the important thing, and they are not being tied down. You can see Red Duke in the distance just getting a light show. Oh man, he's going to go down, and the last summoned Unbreakable Zombie is going to run forward, shamble on, and try oh man, try and do something here. But yeah, it's all over now. So well played to both players here. Thanks to Aristo for submitting that. Definitely kind of see what he was going for there. If you have an appropriate build and your opponent doesn't have the right tools, you certainly can protect your archers against Vampire Counts. It's tricky, but you can protect infantry skirmishers, certainly. That being said, I don't think that this Vampire Count build was very well suited, and also he made that pretty critical mistake of focusing the zombie summon and the bats on the Lothern Sea Guard rather than on the Everqueen's Court Guards, which were, of course, the much bigger threat. But yeah, very well played to both players. Look at these Swordmasters, man. They just cut up that front line, and I do kind of like that pick in this matchup. You don't see Swordmasters super often. They do have some downsides, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But if your opponent doesn't bring the appropriate tools to deal with them, they will just cut the Vampire Infantry to absolute ribbons. So that in and of itself is pretty beneficial. All the Lothern Sea Guard and the Everqueen's Court Guards doing quite well, of course, as well. 205 and 149 on the Dragon Princes. You would expect them to get that much when they're just protecting against chaff summons, more or less, in the back line, so really weren't challenged too much. I mean, I guess they did help take down the Red Duke a bit there, but yeah, the Terrorgeist, because it was just gadded down in the air, really didn't get a chance to try and get its paws on the Dragon Princes there. But yeah, in terms of the Vampire Counts, just rough all around, nothing really paid for itself, and yeah, in terms of this build here, what can I say about it? Well, I've already talked about the air units. The Red Duke is good in this matchup, but there's not really a lot that you need to take on with the Terrorgeist. The monstrous units for the High Elves all deal fire damage and are pretty scary for Terrorgeist to have to deal with. Dragons, of course, is what I'm talking about. But yeah, like Star Dragons will absolutely annihilate Terrorgeist, so I don't really like that pick very much in this match. I think that going with a more ground-focused build that's much wider is going to be better. I also don't really like the pick of the Grave Guard with great weapons unsupported. Now, if you had any one of the following, preferably all of the following, but if you had Dance Macabre on the Red Duke, or whatever Vampire Lord you bring to help buff their melee attack, a Corpse Cart with an Unholy Lodestone gives them healing, and it also gives that nice Vigor Mortis. Let's just go to the post-battle screen, not the post-battle, but the custom battle screen, so we can talk a little bit more about this. So if we bump over here to the Vampire counts, focused on taking on the High Elves. So I already talked about the flying units. There's tons of different lord choices that are viable here, so I'm not really going to go too far into it, but for the sake of argument, let's say I'm bringing Kemmler, who is a little bit goonable, so you have to be careful of that. But you definitely want the Cloak of Mist and Shadows in case a Star Dragon tries to come eat your face. And then in terms of spells here, I'm going to take Invocation of Nehek, Dance Macabre, again for that melee attack, and Raise Dead. Nice cheap kit. Oh, and of course the sort of Chaos Tombblade, that is very essential. So yeah, Blood Knights here. We're going to grab 2 of them to try and challenge the High Elves in the mobility phase. These guys can 1v1 Dragon Princes, no problem, especially considering that you can resurrect unit models, whereas Dragon Princes cannot. Black Coach is, in my opinion, almost essential in this matchup for breaking up your opponent's formation. It does a ton of armor-piercing anti-infantry damage, so it can clean up like a front line of Swordmasters, for example. While they're fighting the chaff, it'll take them a while to cut through the chaff. Your Black Coach can just be running around on top of them, you know, killing all of them, basically, assuming that it doesn't get hit by enemy cavalry. Or you can punch through the front line and run around on your opponent's skirmishers, again, assuming that you've been able to tie up the forces that are meant to be protecting. To that effect, I'm going to go a lot less infantry heavy and just go with a few Grave Guard here just to form an elite backline, but we're going to bring a lot of chaff, because if there's one thing that the High Elves struggle against, it's body count. They can't deal with the high body count. Their units are so expensive that you have a hard time dealing with something like this, for example. You have chaff to throw at them for days in the front line. You have plenty of other infantry to flank around the sides as well while the chaff is fighting in the front line. You have an elite rear guard to come in after your opponent's already exhausted themselves cutting through zombies. You have a flank force to tie up the opponent's protection cavalry, and then you have your Black Coach to punch through the front line and run around on top of your opponent's skirmishers. Now, the important thing is that you prioritize your zombie summons and other tools to take down. I better throw in a Fellbat here, otherwise someone's going to have a conniption fit. I'm looking at you, Aristo. But anyway, yeah, if you got to focus your attention on the units that are the biggest threat in terms of, like, you know, summons, tying down ranged units. You need to be able to assess which units are the greatest threat. And if you see the Sisters of Averlorn on the field, particularly the Everqueen's Core Guards, of course, they're #1 very high value, so you want to try and take them down for that reason alone. But #2, they will do a ton of damage to you, so they need to be your priority in tying down your opponent's ranged units. But still, pretty good demonstration there. I do like the Lothern Sea Guard somewhat in this matchup. Their range is pretty decent. I mean, they'll do okay against the zombie summons. You really don't want them fighting zombie summons because it's not super efficient. They're not gonna take a lot of damage. And of course, large units that manage to get to the back line, they do have a spear to defend themselves, but they're really not meant to fight in melee. You really don't want to be using them in melee as much as possible. So taking the Dragon Princes to protect, definitely a good idea. I've actually run a similar infantry corps, or skirmish infantry corps, in a number of other matchups, and it does work pretty well to have the Lothern Sea Guard protecting the Everqueen's Court Guards. So yeah, I definitely like that. In terms of the front line, the Swordmasters are a nice surprise pick. Phoenix Guard are a bit more expensive, but they're pretty good in this matchup too, just because I mean, they'll do the same thing. They have excellent combat stats as well. Not the anti-infantry, obviously, so they probably won't cut through them quite as quickly, but they'll still do very well against most vampire count infantry. Only something like a Graveguard that's with great weapons that's crazy juiced up would be able to do anything to these guys in terms of an infantry battle. But they are a bit more expensive, so you know, maybe we only bring one of them, a couple of spearmen, and of course we're going to want Techless. And yeah, we'll go ahead and cut Flock of Doom and Chain Lightning, and the Bound Fiery Convocation is completely worthless, so we'll cut that as well. Now we're left with about 200 points here. I guess, let's see, I'm trying to recreate Aristo's build here from memory without having to go back and look at it, but something like this I think it was, and then maybe he just tossed out some chevrons somewhere. Anyway, a pretty solid build overall. I might change out a few things here and there, but anyway, let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. Hope you guys enjoyed watching. If you do like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button, so every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.